I suppose that interview went about as well as could be expected. Even when Blizzard tries to generate hype, they continue to wheel out the wrong sales guy and everyone seemingly leaves the event feeling annoyed. Hello possums, yes it is I, the conspicuous Mew, with yet another lamentation on the design direction of Shadowlands, this time the aftermath of the recent Preach and Ion Hazzikostas chinwag. As usual, there were some glaring issues regarding Ion's philosophy when it comes to World of Warcraft, and these need to be pointed out and acted upon. So, let's get cracking. Now, first up, I'm not saying that Blizzard should fire the guy, that would be mean. After all, he is almost certainly responsible for sterling work that has entertained and enthralled us since he joined us in 2008. But after almost 13 years at the company, including 4.5 as the game director, it might be an idea to shuffle him off to another department. Something like creating government agencies with enormous amounts of paperwork and pointless red tape to keep people busy and frustrated. Put bluntly, he doesn't look like the right fit to be directing this game. Anyway, let's start with some of the main things to take away from this frank exchange of ideas. A common thread I picked up during the discussion was the apparent need by Blizzard to make everything available to everyone. Now, as any politician will tell you, trying to make everyone happy ends up satisfying nobody, but this dark reality is either not understood or just flatly ignored. In fact, this kind of participation metal thinking has likely contributed more than any other factor to World of Warcraft's decline in quality and subscription retention. The Gilbert and Sullivan phrase, "when everyone is somebody then no one's anybody," does spring to mind here. The mindset has also infected the way your character is treated in-game. You're no longer the scrub adventurer in rags with no name to speak of. Everyone is now a fully certified living god of whichever faction they represent. This hero-champion problem is not unique to World of Warcraft, of course. It's sadly almost an MMO staple by this point, but that doesn't mean that it absolutely needs to be in this particular game. I guess what I'm trying to say, Ian, is that it's absolutely okay to put some things out of a player's reach so they have something to strive for and achieve. Character progression is, after all, a key component of an MMO gameplay. Accessibility for everything is not necessarily a good thing, and too much of it stagnates interest and motivation to play your game. And it's usually at that point that you tend to invent lots of systems that are seemingly mandatory in order to get anywhere, and these end up being resented. You will likely recognise a lot of them in this presentation. Moving on now to the most obvious problem with the 9.1 PTR right now, is that while it is new content, it's still the same pig just with different lipstick on. Take Korthia, an area that at the moment is to Timeless Isle what astrology is to astrophysics. No, it's a PTR. It's still in progress. I think I and everyone else gets that. But, in Ian's own words, they only release something to the PTR when there's something to show the player base, and there's just nothing original going on here at all. More has been promised, including a gearing system which sounds very reminiscent of the Nazjatar catch-up gear and its accompanying currency. Now, if you really need catch-up gear to be implemented in the first patch of your expansion, then that should send a few red flags up your mainmast, frankly. Then there are the new reputation and the activities in the zone, which it must be the template that they start all of these projects with. It's a whole bunch of kill-collect daily quests and a reputation reward panel anyone could come up with. 2 mounts, a pet, a toy, a profession recipe. The creativity on offer here would easily fit on a teaspoon. This insistence on making yet another gearing path for players is also idiotic. First of all, people who don't partake in raids, PvP or dungeons don't need a gearing path. The world is ridiculously easy to carve your way through as it is. Secondly, it's the 4th version of gear progression that is now being offered to players. You have this More Touch Korthia stuff with their Matrix upgrades, you have the PvP gear which will now be 13 eye levels higher whenever you're in a PvP situation to make that better than other gear types. You then have the Raid gear which will have special shards to augment your performance in raids only with reduced effectiveness in other environments, and finally you have the Mythic Plus system with its Valor upgrade. My question is why everything has to be this relentlessly complicated? What exactly is wrong with just having your normal, garden variety, non-borrowed power, non-azerited piece of equipment? Have Blizzard signed some sort of secret deal with raid bots to gouge the player base? Because they're going to have to sim all of this crap regularly just to get the answers that they need. Who out there is clamouring for all of this convoluted mess? Torghast looks like it's little better. I mean, I have seen some people hailing Torments as a great innovation, but that's not the pulse I've been feeling. Torments were originally added to Torghast in beta, but were rightly removed after players testing it pointed out how annoying and shit it was. But they're back now, and colour me amazed, they're just as annoying and shit as they were before. And in another example of Participation Medal Plus, you now can't fail in Torghast. They simply remove death as an issue. You just have to keep moving and killing so that score bar stays nice and high and get your 4 gems out of 5. Oh, and incidentally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for adding yet another currency to the game, this time in the form of Soul Cinders. This is presumably to avoid people doing just the first 8 floors in Torghast, to avoid having too many of those tasty torments, and then being quite happy to wait a little longer to spend their soul ash on legendary upgrades. So good news folks, Torghast is still utterly mandatory, and it now comes with affixes like random damage reflection, which I'm sure are going to be immensely satisfying to experience. Still, got to keep up that engagement treadmill, hey? Just look at those participation numbers. Now, little progress has been made on conduit energy. I understand that it now resets if you switch your covenant. But have they made switching covenants less of a ball ache? Of course they haven't. Does this change or address the concerns of any player who does more than one role in one aspect of the game and runs out of this pointless resource? Of course it doesn't. Is this just another way of Ion Hazzikostas pointlessly blocking the will of the player base to play the way they want in World of Warcraft? Ding 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 ding! 4 points and a hot dog to you. Please, by all means, show me the people who are thanking you for putting conduit energy into the game, Ian. Go on, show me. Are these the same people who apparently love the journey of levelling alts through the opening more content in Torghast? Who love the journey of doing the same Covenant campaign, Renown catch-up and Anima farm on another character? How really can you even talk about the journey when it's faster than ever to blast up the levels to 60? I mean, you actually went out of your way to remove the journey from the World of Warcraft experience. Chromie's out there sitting on a log in the capital city saying, you know man, fuck your journey. And if you are really serious about not adding things for adding's sake, then perhaps you might want to change Covenant legendaries before they become a thing. I have stated many times before that making class-specific Covenant abilities was going to lead to people choosing their Covenant based upon the strongest ability and not the aesthetic or vibe, otherwise known as what they really wanted and liked. It is especially true with your main character, and it's probably true with ults. I know that my Holy Priest wouldn't naturally have gone to the Necrolords because it's about as unholy there as things can possibly be. So with all this said, not only are you not acknowledging that you might have made a mistake, you're doubling down and adding a system on top of a system that shouldn't have existed in the first place. It's a very Ion Hazzikostas way to find solutions to problems of your own making. Now, are design decisions like this necessarily Ion Hazzikostas' fault? Well, yes, he's in charge. He's also the face of the development team that we see the most of, and he's the one who was rolled out to conduct painful interviews with Preach that make him look like a complete nully. It would take quite a salesman to make that kind of convincing pitch that re-adding Torments to Torghast and keeping Conduit Energy are both excellent ideas, and let's be honest here, Ion is no marketer. I've always personally found him to be a bit of a charisma vacuum and doesn't sound interested or passionate enough in his own work. Now, that's just the impression that I get from his interviews, but I'm sure that I'm not alone here. Granted, it is difficult to cultivate enthusiasm when you're talking about how well Covenant's worked out and how it's a model for future expansions. That was a corker of a line that practically nobody listening wanted to hear. Credit where credit's due and actually turning up to the interview though. It's not as if these two men see eye to eye when it comes to a lot of issues in World of Warcraft, so even if almost everything Ion Hazzikostas says is depressingly familiar, at least he's prepared to go into bat for it. We also agree on something, which is that adding 3 new abilities to each class every expansion is not a sustainable class design model. It's fortunate for both of us then, Ian, that nobody was asking for or expecting that. I would personally settle for any class design at this point, given that this aspect of development has seen very little activity for at least 2 expansions, while the number of expansion-only bolt-ons to our progression continues to increase. Returning a few old abilities of dubious value to classes is not class design in itself, and actually goes against Ian's stated desire to not do that sort of thing. Given a player's very real attachment to their main, actually going out of your way to not iterate and improve on classes is a very real detriment to your subscription numbers. Who wants to play their class when the very obvious flaws in it still exist, but instead of fixes, you've got a bunch of additional miscellaneous procky crap stapled onto your character that will magically disappear come patch 10.0. It's as if Ian thinks that you won't be able to prune abilities that are super niche or usually worthless, as if doing the actual yards and making the classes enjoyable would end up with people having 16 action bars overflowing with absurdly unbalanced abilities and players needing additional hands to be grafted onto their bodies in order to optimize properly. And this is the key problem with Ion Hazzikostas as game director. He's not creative at all. He's a planner, not a fixer. He's almost completely impervious to the effects that his nightmarish systems creations will have on the player base and how they will be received. Even when he's warned by the finest minds in WoW gaming, and I am definitely not in this category, he does continue to chart his resolute course towards inevitable disaster. If a change is ever made, it's always too late and done begrudgingly to acknowledge that the grand idea wasn't working. Ian's usual solution to a broken system is simply to paint another system over it and hope that we don't notice the underlying rust. It's an inflexible approach that requires him to patch over the holes in his own ship with whatever's available to hand. And we can all see you doing it, Ian. Why didn't you check the hull before you launched it into the Azerothian seas? He's not without value, of course. If you need a raid leader, Ian's your man. He'd be a genius in human resources. If you needed a business strategy, he'd be there with a PowerPoint presentation in minutes. But this is not a person you want leading your creative endeavours. There is very little imagination or flair in the modern game, and as the head of this WoW behemoth, everyone underneath him are all working to further his vision. It's a bit unfortunate then that this vision is stale, regimented, lacking passion, and utterly, utterly dull. Battle for Azeroth was in Classic's shadow for a good reason. One of them was actually a good game. And it does look like Shadowlands is going to be in a similar boat when Burning Crusade Classic launches. It really says something about the quality of modern WoW's design when you've been cuckolded by the same game from 17 years past. At this stage, he's presided over two of the most disappointing expansions in World of Warcraft's history, and you know that if he stays in the role much longer, we'll just be fed more of the same rotten fruit. 9.2 is in the planning, and the next expansion is peeking around the sofa screaming that it doesn't want to be systemed to death. An intervention at Blizzard Entertainment does have to be made. They alone have the subscription numbers, of course, but I'm betting they don't look good. They're not going to get a lot of bounce out of 9.1 with the way that it's currently going. And after 13 years, almost 5 as the main man, maybe it's time for a fresh perspective and warm blood to take up the mantle and save this game before it disappears forever under the weight of its own bolted-on systems. One last thing on a personal note, please do something about Mistweavers now that it has been brought to your attention. Preach is no Mistweaver, and even he knows what a sorry state we're in. Try some class design. You might like it. On that note, here closeth the rant. Warcraft looks like it's only going to get worse with Ion Hazzikostas at the helm, and that is very, very sad to see. I will be back again soon, but until then, I am the conspicuous moo, and a very fond adieu to you.